Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another exciting AdvisorShares AlphaNooner. Thanks for joining. We are looking forward to a conversation with Todd Harrison, founder and CIO of CB1 Capital Management, getting some insight into the cannabis investing landscape as it continues to develop. There's always something to talk about, which we mentioned previously. Cannabis has never been boring. But if you're out there and you have questions, I've seen some already come in, which is great. You are always welcome to join the conversation with us and put in a comment, put in a question in the chat, and we will do our best to answer as we go along. We do try to make these kind of communicative and a good way to connect with everyone out there. So with all that said, I'm going to retweet this as well to let people know that we are live. But with all that said, Todd, thanks for joining. How are you doing? How's your day starting off?
Day's okay, all things considered. It's been a tough road in 2025 for our sector, much like 2024, 2023, and 2022. But we'll see what happens as we move into the new year. The administrative positions are filled, the czars are appointed, and we'll see where this issue falls on the new administration's priority list.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to cover, both from sort of a company perspective, and then, of course, like you're saying, kind of on the political element. I know that's been a huge kind of component for cannabis in general. So we'll touch on all of that. But just because we are coming up on earnings season, I know we have Green Thumb announcing later today. I figured that was sort of a good spot to start. And of course, obviously, Trulieve and Verano tomorrow as well, which we will talk about the Trulieve news. I've seen a lot of comments wanting kind of more insight on that, so we'll cover that soon. But just kind of high level covering earnings and what you're expecting for this quarter. What are you looking at? What are you looking for? What are things that are sort of top of mind going into this earnings season?
Yeah, well, I don't think anybody's looking for much good.
Sure.
I think expectations estimates are for slightly down. I think that's where guidance is. And if you look at some of the impediments that are littering our landscape, it sort of fits, right? And we'll talk about sort of those worry warts in a moment. But we've seen some decent earnings so far. Glasshouse, obviously, yeah. C21, also growth, no debt, like just a good situation right there.
I will also put in a quick plug. We're having Glasshouse on tomorrow. So if you are interested in hearing more details, definitely join us tomorrow. But quick plug.
And I will say I'm on the board of C21. So just in a position in Glasshouse, but nonetheless, like they were both great, right? And, in the case of C21, the stock hasn't moved, like nobody's home, right? Like stock doesn't even trade. Glasshouse is up some from where the print is, but it's very muted. I think it speaks to the overall dynamic, in the market. You were asking about Green Thumb. Green Thumb's going to be best in breed, likely amongst the large MSOs. They always sort of sandbag a la Steve Jobs and come in, a little bit better. They've got the Agrify component they can speak to, and the warrants and how those are valued and contribute to the numbers. But that's typically sort of, the tip of the iceberg in terms of quality. And then from there, you have different hair as you go down the scale. The question, I guess, for all of them, because obviously we have Green Thumb today, we have Trulieve and Verano tomorrow morning, is, how much is baked in, is priced in after, I think the ETF lost 57% or some crazy numbers in the election, right? So more than a 2-for-1 organic stock split. So at some level, some of the concerns are priced in, but as I alluded to before, it's not just the growth concerns, which really tie back to the regulatory landscape and how do they navigate hemp, vis-a-vis cannabis, right? It's hard to go on social media and have advertisements for the same products that are heavily regulated and controlled in safety protocols and stuff, and not feel that in your sales numbers. So growth is going to show, pretty, muted or meh results. But if you sort of took a step back and say from a category standpoint, and you look at the growth of hemp and the growth of cannabis collectively, the growth is pretty incredible, right? So I think, what the market, what these stocks really need, amongst other things, is regulatory clarity. And, whether that's at the state by state level or top down through the Farm Bill, or both, I think that ultimately could help solve for that and take that bogart away in terms of the hemp channel, or as we've seen with some of these names, allow them to participate in the beverage side of that equation.
Yep, I do definitely want to talk more about that. And again, I'm seeing more and more questions, which is great. Kind of talking about Trulieve and their new entry into kind of the beverage side of things, but just sort of putting a final button in earnings in general. I know, a lot of people, of course, are looking for profitability, looking at the balance sheet, looking at where the debt is and all of those things as well. But do you think we see any sort of trends between, size of companies, between kind of where their footprint is? Because like you mentioned, Glass House, they're having a positive start to the year, which is maybe surprising because I think a lot of times the focus is in those big top names, which can do very, very well. But any sort of themes, or do you think it's sort of like individual companies across a bunch of different kind of approaches could be doing well?
Well, I mean, just to go back to the worry warts, for lack of a better word. I mean,
Fair.
there's a number of things that are sort of weighing on investors' minds, right? You have the DEA and where the rescheduling, process is. You have the IRS and the tax treatment,
Yeah.
right? You have the hemp conversation and growth. I kind of lump them together. And then you have, the debt cliff that's coming up, and the ability or clarity or guidance on how companies are going to start to navigate. Some already have. We didn't mention TerrAscend. TerrAscend pre-announced a pretty decent number, and the stock hasn't moved either. So, this isn't a story about earnings. I think you'll get, probably more of a negative reaction to things that aren't good than a positive reaction to things that are good,
Sure.
because this is really boiled down into a referendum on federal reform, or guidance, clarity, or some semblance of awareness that this needs to be addressed, and then some actions to that regard. This was a promises made, or a pledge made.
Yep.
I don't think this is where he sort of draws the line and says, I'm not going to keep that promise. I think it's more a function of priority. It was getting Pam Bondi. It was getting Robert F. Kennedy Jr. I understand there's some prohibitionists, that are in the DEA and at the OMB, and I get that. But you also see Pam Bondi, pretty much laying down the hammer, saying, you're going to support Trump's agenda. And she's the attorney general, and while she's been publicly very demure and stoic on the issue, the channel checks seem to support her being on board the president's mandate. And so we'll see what happens. We've been having a lot of conversations. This is, a lot of things are taking shape right now. A lot of people are finding their seats. I thought, you had mentioned that when we were in the virtual green room, the dichotomy between Trump talking about death penalties for drug dealers and, then, appointing a pardon czar, Alice Marie Johnson, as the pardon czar. And I don't think that those are that, far different, right? I think when he's talking about drugs, and he didn't necessarily elucidate this, he was talking about fentanyl, he was talking about opioids, he was talking about illicit drugs. He says, you want to cut the drug use in half by 50%? Great, let's get rid of the illicit market. Problem solved. And you'll take the 450,000 jobs, and you check a box on a campaign promise. So there's a lot of reasons why, we should see movement, whether that waits until second chance month, or something happens prior, or not at all, I don't know. But I think, what the market's telling you, the volumes or lack thereof are telling you, is that produce the corpse and will release Sloan. So
I think it's still wait and see for sure. On the sort of Trump talking about the death penalty for drug dealers, I do agree with you that I think that is more directed towards sort of opioids and sort of harsher drugs ultimately. But, do you see, if we did see something like that actually come to fruition, that having an impact for cannabis, maybe on the illicit market, just if there are extreme penalties for illicit drug movement, even if it's for something like cannabis, which I think ultimately could be less harmful than opioids directly, than fentanyl.
I don't know, but it does fit. One of the conversations we had with the transition team early was, the focus on the human trafficking through the illicit, cannabis networks that have sprouted up all over the country. So there's more than one reason to shut that down, right? And it's hard to shut it down. Like you can't, what is it?
Horse back in the box.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta be, and I was talking about this earlier today with somebody I was having a conversation with. Well, what do you mean you favor of banning hemp? Isn't that a prohibitionist mindset? And I said, I'm not in favor of banning hemp. I'm in favor of all cannabinoids being treated equal.
Regulating.
Regulated. That's the same thing, being treated equal through a regulatory lens.
Yeah.
right? So, whatever it is. And like, we've had conversations like, do we just try to, slip cannabis through the hemp, the farm bill? It's germane. I mean, it is
Yeah.
farming, right?
Yeah.
But there's a lot of moving parts right now in terms of where those, that focus is gonna be applied. I can say I do think, and having conversations with others, there seems to be a consensus that this, more than most other presidential administrations, is very much top down, right? Like,
Yes.
what the big man wants, if he wants this, he'll get it. It's the question of, what's the priority right now for him. And, I get the fact that the radio silence is deafening, right?
Yes.
I get it, but subject to change.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I feel like there's been so much focus, of course, on Trump for that very reason, where kind of what he says goes in terms of, and the party will follow behind him on what he's making. But I know Elon has been very much in the mix. I know he's had kind of mixed, but generally positive, I think, views on cannabis. How much does that come into play? How much are you kind of keeping an eye on kind of his views and kind of his influence, I think, in the White House currently, or excluding it and just saying Trump has made positive? What's your thought?
I don't know. I haven't really given him much thought. I know he's probably net falls in, on the green team. But the focus thus far, has been really on trying to, build bridges with the Bondi team and with the RFK team and with the people who are going to be, more sort of focused on the issues that are relevant to us. We have heard some good things about some people who you wouldn't ordinarily expect to be focused on the issue, to be focused on the issue of banking, right? Coming from, coming from areas that aren't necessarily germane to that conversation. So we'll see what happens. It's hard, to be so wrong for so long on the specter of the government doing anything, right? And then on top of that, all of the other delays, and on top of that, the hemp, the intoxicating hemp channel. It's like, hit me again, Ike, and this time put some stank on it. Like, what else can they really throw at the industry at this point? So, is it existential? Like, for some, yeah, like there's nothing, if we don't get anything done, this year, like it's going to get a lot more barren. But there's going to be, winners that come through and, use that to their benefit. And, depending on who you talk to will sort of dictate who those winners are. I do think that there's a fair amount of panic, I guess, around sort of the future, not necessarily just in the price action, but just in, if these companies do survive, what do they look like given the debt cliff, given the IRS bill, given all these other unknowns like hemp. But, as we start to check boxes on clarity, that sentiment could shift, particularly from sort of here. That sentiment could shift relatively quickly.
Yeah, definitely agree. I definitely think the high amount of uncertainty has been tough and continues to be tough, especially when sentiment has been so low. It is a little difficult, I think, to have seen at least little bits of kind of almost breadcrumbs that seem positive. Who was at the inauguration, Trump's comments previously, of course. I feel like we've gotten,
Bondi's comments, her opening comments talked about the First Step Act. That's criminal justice reform. Like,
it's all important. But again, I think it's hard, which is good.
mean, but in the context of Pam Bondi's mandate and this president's sort of mandate of the Attorney General and what her focus has been, it's sort of an outlier in the context of what everything else that she said, and everything else she stands for. It was an interesting addition to the conversation that she led with. Right. It was the only time she mentioned it. And I don't think enough people understand that, it was Alice Johnson and Weldon Angelos that worked with President Trump on the First Step Act. So, it is tangential. It's just not, like the market's like tangential. The market doesn't believe anything. They want results, and I don't blame them. So do I. So do my wife.
Agree. Me too.
My wife wants results.
I get it. All right. Well, so I know we've kind of gotten off course, just kind of talking through the political element, which I think is important, and we'll get back into it, maybe talking as well about a kind of state level as well. But I had seen some comments around Trulieve, the news there, so I did want to kind of pull it back to that element. From Kenneth talking about the new drink drop, Fabio talking about the new drink drop for Trulieve. Would love to get your high-level thoughts and then kind of talk through some things that you're seeing on that front.
Yeah, so definitely green shoot. International and hemp beverages were the green shoots. International with the German election we didn't talk about is now sort of is less certain of a green shoot. Although just while we're talking about that, we have the thought amongst people who were involved, and obviously where you stand is a function of where you sit, is that because of the coalition, we're not going to know until then, but there is an appetite to keep, an economic appetite to keep the medical channel status quo, which would be a good status quo. Probably you lose social clubs and you lose phase 2, but that could paradoxically, again, according to somebody who is selling into that channel, benefit medical sales because it would, that would be the only game in town. But we don't know. But my point was that there were, and there still probably are, 2 green shoots that we can point to right now, and one of which maybe is international, and the other of which is hemp beverages. And we're involved with a company called Horticulture. They sell the Tempters brand. They're crushing it. We talk to them most days, and it's just it's honestly what sort of we were hoping to see when we got into the cannabis proper space, right? In terms of that type of acceleration. But the category is going to get saturated, right? So there's going to be, you saw Kim come in today with an $8 a can offering. I don't know. I'm not drinking $8 a can offer. It's not when I can get Tempters at $4 and I love it. You know what I'm saying? But
I think to be fair, it was 20 for $4 in stores, but I think online there's a premium online, but that's fair. They are more expensive.
But my point is, like, we were told that there are, big alcohol companies that are, in line to introduce their hemp-derived drinks, and they need to. They talk about existential, like alcohol consumption that's not just a short-term thing. That's demographic, right? Like you see it, like in almost paradoxically the same way when I went on Yahoo Finance 13 years ago, and said cannabis was my best idea for the next decade. A little early, or wrong, I guess, so far, but it was the same type of sense that this is what you see on the horizon, but it's going to take some time to get to there, and there's going to be a lot of twists and turns before you get there. But we were talking about alcohol brands entering the space, and they have the capacity to come in and offer like $3 a can drinks, right? So are they going to be able to undercut the market? Like our guys at Tempters don't think so. They think that there's going to be categories and people are going to look for the best quality at the right price. This is the same team that's behind Roar Organic, ROAR. They're number 1 in the hydration category. So, they have a great flavor house and all of their beverage people, right? But a lot of, I guess what remains to be seen is, if cannabis people can be beverage people, or if beverage people are going to be cannabis people. And I think you're going to have some, some of both potentially, but over time, I guess the question on why most MSOs haven't done this is, it comes down to, I guess, visibility that you will be able to continue this past September when the new Farm Bill comes out. And, we're on record. We think the loophole, at the very least, carves out hemp-derived beverages, but if flower and vapes and gummies go back, into the legal channel, great, right? That to me is a fair solution. I don't know if it's the right solution, but it's a possible solution. The other solution is they could potentially just leave it status quo, which would mean, you'll probably see Glass House hemp flower, be able to be delivered. And then against that, the context of the states doing what the states do. So for instance, when I wanted to try the Curaleaf drinks, which I ultimately did and didn't enjoy, but I finally got them. But I couldn't order them online because I lived in New York, right? Yeah. So, but I could get, the senoritas, Ben's drink. I tried, also not my cup of tea. And I'm just,
Is it flavored Is it what
Yeah,
it?
just to, I don't know. Maybe I'm a creature of habit, but the
Sure.
Tempters is 10 calories. It's like it's a great taste. There's no aftertaste, and I enjoy it. And it's, I haven't had a drink like I told you, other
Yeah.
than for the month of, I guess, December last year. It's been 2 years,
Yeah.
and it just as I'm not. I know I'm not alone because you see the numbers, but I do think again that this becomes sort of that funnel into a deeper cannabis experience. You gotta get, the left hand has to talk to the right hand from a regulatory standpoint. Hopefully the Farm Bill contributes to that. Hopefully we see Schedule 3 because RFK wants to study the plan. Hopefully we see banking because, as debanking showed, there's no industry that's taken a harder, hit on that front than cannabis. And you have a president that's out on multiple occasions talking about the amazing benefits of medical and the incongruities with people being in prison when half the country could smoke illegally. So, if he's a common sense president, America First president, you saw the Fox hit where, this is the antithesis of America First. We have to list up in Canada.
Sure.
Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll see. Remember last year, early on, was it last year? Yeah, we were up. I think the ETF was the top performing sector ETF in the first quarter, or at least for the first 2 months, and then the wheels fell off the wagon. So here we are 2 months in, and we're probably, if not the worst performing ETF amongst them. And so we'll see if there's a mirror image in play, not only for year over year, but with regard to the blue sweeping, straight up, and then 4 years of pain, maybe the red sweep will turn into straight down, followed by, a few years of a bid, because we're going to get some clarity in a president that actually can get things done, or wants to get things done if he wants to get things done. It sucks to have to rely on DC after relying on DC, but you see it in the volumes, you see it in the price action, and every day that we don't get something is another day that people think we won't. So that's the sense of urgency that I think the industry is operating with right now.
I think that's true. I will say, luckily, it does sound like, again, the industry has good channels of communication into the administration. So hopefully that is helpful and useful in terms of communicating that urgency, communicating, specifically what they need, and kind of having that be aligned. So be interesting. Looking really quickly, interesting. Drinks over ice. Seeing El Guapo does a tincture into chai tea. That sounds nice, but yes, does sound tough to scale. I will say, like you're saying, though, different preferences and tastes maybe makes me think that there is some room for different types of hemp-based drinks, and that the competition, while it seems like there's an acceleration in that, there's more and more players that they each can find maybe their own niche a little bit. I do wonder on the beverage side, just because I feel like one of the biggest benefits from offering a hemp drink is really that ability to have visibility and branding, because you're able to get more reach, more access, tap into people who might be less likely, like you're saying, who are less cannabis people, who are going into a dispensary, and more likely to tap into people who normally drink or something like that, might be hitting the store. Is there a focus on getting those drinks in front of, like, getting placement in grocery stores, getting placement in maybe even bars or things like that, to try to drive up that branding, especially maybe ahead of entrants like big alcohol or something like that? So you have that branding.
Yeah, no, it's the analogy to content, the content revolution in Y2K, which I was thick in the middle of, and it was always trying to get people at first to your website, right?
Yeah.
You want to get your audience to your content,
Mhm.
and then people realized that no, we got to get our content to the audience. We got to get our content to where they already are, so they'll read it as part of their thing, as opposed to putting the onus on them to find us. And then that's set the stage to go down the portals. Remember Yahoo, AOL,
Yeah, of course.
and then ultimately social media, fragmented all of that. So I almost see that as sort of the playbook for cannabis, right? Because it's not about getting people into your place of business to sell products. It's about getting that product out to where they already are, and they see it. They go, "Huh, I'll try that." It's a consumer preference. I think the same holds true for cannabis proper, insofar that the trends from having people come into your store to someone who is a longtime consumer like myself, if I had the ability to just, and I do, but I don't always utilize it, but have, it delivered, straight to me, and what's what I want, it's when I want it. And, that's what I'm going to opt for, because I don't need I typically don't, as my wife will tell you and my daughter will tell you, like, I don't like shopping, right?
Sure.
Like like that's why I didn't go to Italy. One of the reasons I didn't go to Italy last week with them, because my daughter is studying abroad in Florence. My wife is going. She's like, you can come, but we're going to be, okay.
Shopping.
I'm really not, have fun.
Yeah. Got to hold down the fort.
But my point being, like, different strokes for different folks. You're always going to have a consumer that's curious and wants to check it out. But I don't think the model is going to be like, the most stores win. I think the model is going to be the best brands win, the best product at the most affordable prices on a consistent basis, like anything else, any other product.
No, I think that makes sense. I think they just sort of can act in some ways like little kind of billboards for people. I think is super interesting. Stevie's mentioning Cantrip, which is great. We've had Adam on the show before, and he's done a great job of explaining it. But I've seen on Twitter or X, whatever, kind of having those mini billboards makes a difference, I think, over time, I would imagine.
Yeah, but I think that's one of the two potential green shoots this year, absent regulatory reform. So it's not surprising to see, entrance into the category, and we're going to definitely see more. Then it becomes a true, Darwinian process of, which brands win. And I'm not sure if I'm supposed to repeat this, but I will, because I doubt they're watching. But like, I had got a text this morning that Tempter sold 400 cases in Athens, which was Georgia, which was more than all the other THC drinks combined for the month. And I'm like, that to me is like, that's the type of data point, as somebody who's monitoring this business, that sticks out to me, right? It's not necessarily how much you're selling, it's how much you're selling relative to your competition. And to the ability to outperform in states and to rationalize your footprint and all that will come into play. But you're very much seeing a land grab right now, and not necessarily by cannabis, but by alcohol, because they need it. And you're going to see more. Like, I know for a fact that you're going to see some big, alcohol brands rolling out their THC lines. So
definitely think hitting some states like Georgia, where it's much more restricted and not, able to access legal cannabis yet. I imagine that's got to be hotspots for, those different companies. So we'll see.
Aaron Adelhart, has been on this since the go. Like, he was, he identified this trend. I know he's got a fund that's dedicated to cannabis beverages, but I think there's more to come here. I mean, I know AGP had a note out this morning that said, amongst other things, let's see, we believe the hemp-derived THC beverages could represent a $13.5 billion market if available nationally in similar channels as alcohol. We view hemp-derived THC beverages as one of the green shoots for the industry in 2025. And we'll be listening for commentary on how management teams aim to capitalize on the opportunity. Not everybody has the wherewithal to, or the desire for that matter, to, enter this category. There's a reason that most dispensaries don't sell low-dose hemp beverages, or low-dose cannabis beverages, because margins aren't there, and they're bulky, right? So,
even though I think there's got to be an appetite for that. I think low dose for people who are not cannabis people coming in is probably a much easier on-ramp, but I understand in terms of the actual.
No, but my point being, like, there was never an appetite to carry these beverages, so there shouldn't be a resistance to giving them up, especially if you can make frenemies with somebody that's going to lobby to, make the farm bill, just about carving out the beverages and getting flour and gummies and vapes back into the regulated channel, or allowing cannabis companies to sell into those other channels as well. One of the two. Doesn't really matter. I obviously would prefer to see the democratization of the space, but it's not the duality right now is part of the reason there's so much of a civil war of sorts between the two sectors.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I mean, I wish it worked differently, but I think you're right. You have to operate in reality and kind of work in the current environment. So that makes sense. Nice pun, El Guapo. Always can count on you for a good pun with Dan Grubb. Yeah, High Tie has been having a good time, which is awesome. All right, final question that I wanted to hit on, kind of topical, just because it's related to award shows and things like that. I saw for the Oscars that GTI got their dog walkers in the grab bag, welcome bag, which is kind of a cool thing. I think there's some other cannabis things in that grab bag in general. Any thoughts on that in terms of continuing kind of acceptance, continuing, I don't know, sort of normalization, even though obviously the Oscars are not, everyone's not going to the Oscars, but it's just sort of a big event, a common event. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I didn't see that, so I'm actually just looking for it. But that's really freaking cool.
Pretty cool.
Another sign of normalization, I mean,
Neat.
it's a great brand. I mean, like that's the one thing, as we listen to dog walkers tonight, it's like dog walkers. We listen to Green Thumb tonight. It's like, anybody who's sort of, in our space and looking at, as a consumer, like we're all like familiar with dog walkers. We're all familiar with Incredibles, right? Like this is sort of the end goal here of any of these companies, to build national brands in a siloed state, dependent footprint. So I think he's done an admirable job. There's a lot of things that he's done that other operators haven't. That'll be on full display tonight. I know that there's been some friction between Ben and some of the other participants in the marketplace, regarding some of the vehicles in the marketplace. But I feel like that's the sort of thing that you see when, after a 4+ year bear market with a 90% drawdown across pretty much every company, top to bottom. We'll see. We'll see what happens.
Looking forward. We'll definitely be tuning in. Do you have a quick Oscar pick? Who do you want to win? Who do you want an Oscar, someone to walk away with an Oscar today?
I don't even know who's nominated. I stopped watching the award shows when we won our Emmy Award a few years back.
Oh, nice.
So,
good plug.
A couple of those on my mantle, and when I want to watch the Emmys, I just go downstairs. No, I'm kidding. I don't know any of the. I don't watch. I don't even know who's nominated. I couldn't tell you one nominee or one movie that's nominated. But I can tell you anything about this.
Honestly, probably better that you're spending your time on cannabis rather than on random films and cinema. So I think that's good.
My wife would agree with you on that, but listen, we didn't come this far to come this far. I feel like we're gonna see, we'll know one way or the other by Memorial Day, sort of where we stand. I feel like if we don't hear anything by Memorial Day, like the writing's on the wall, but I'm pretty confident we will. So we just got to get there. I don't know how bad earnings are going to be. They're not going to be like, if I was a generalist, I would see these earnings and be like, shit, I got to go buy these stocks right now.
Sure.
Right. But when you sort of factor in all of the artificial impediments and the hemp bogart and, the inability to access capital markets and, the IRS and the DEA and, I can go on. Like, I don't blame people for, saying, let's see how this thing plays out. But, there's going to be a U.S. cannabis industry, hopefully in an America First administration that'll be able to list on the New York Stock Exchange as opposed to the Canadian Stock Exchange. And, quite hopefully, calmer heads prevail. We see a, merging of the rules and regs around hemp and cannabis. And, awesome. We until that point, what you said, what are we looking for earnings? We're looking for commentary around how companies are going to navigate the status quo, what their hemp strategies are and why, and free cash flow to the extent that we could find it.
Yep. All right. I think that's fantastic. Super interesting as always. Again, really appreciate the insight and kind of talking through always, we always talk about how cannabis is always interesting, always evolving. So I feel like it's super helpful to kind of work through and digest some of the elements that we're seeing, just because I think when there's uncertainty, it's helpful to kind of work through what the possibilities could be. So I think that's helpful. Definitely looking forward to tuning in as earnings run through, and we will check in roughly 2 weeks to see where we are, but appreciate you taking the time, Todd. Thanks everyone for being here. Thanks for your great questions, your great comments. We really appreciate it and hope you will join us tomorrow with Class House. All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Before investing, carefully consider the investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses found in the prospectus, available at AdvisorShares.com.